now we're up to part 3 of the seminar. So part 3 I want to talk about, just at a high level, managing water losses and a summary of the key issues and just some suggestions. So I just wanted to briefly talk about how large can leaks be. Remember we talked about the public systems up to the boundary, and you've got a private line here. So leaks can be private or public. And UK data, or similar size, anyway, UK data shows that average leakage on an unmetered private water service pipe is around 40 litres a connection per day, and 10 litres per connection per day for metered properties, where the meters are read sort of 6 monthly. So basically, this is an average figure. So not every property's got large leaks, but probably 3-4% of properties will have quite a large leak on their underground pipe here. And if you take that leakage volume and divide it by all the properties, this figure is around 40 litres per connection per day. But if you put a water meter there, all of a sudden people get the high water bill and they fix that, and so that drops. And even if the meter's only read every 6 months, that'll drop from 40 to 10. So you will save 30 litres per property per day on average by putting in water meters. You can save more if you read more frequently. This figure's pretty good. There was a small town in the South Island where they put water meters in, about 200 properties, and the contractor was good because when he put the water meter in, he looked to see if there was a leak. And he found about 4 or 5 properties out of the 200 that had leaks, and he wrote down the leakage rate. And I went through that, I added up the data, and it worked out it was 35 or 40. It was very close. It's a good figure. How large can leaks be? Did you remember this in the paper last year? Marlborough District Council are putting water meters in a township to address, I guess, capacity issues, and good on them. It's happening around New Zealand in different little places. And so this house had a leak of 67,000 litres of water a day, and they only found it because they put the water meter in at the boundary. And so this leak was happening long term, don't know how long it's been running, months, years. Customers fined, so there's probably running high pressure because it hid the issue that you've got a leak there. But nobody knew. The water would have been getting away into a drain or a pipe. And so there you have it. That could supply probably 170 houses in some parts of New Zealand. But there's even more. But wait, there's more. The Renwick household was one of about 180 properties, and the Marlborough District Council discovered to have leaking water during the town's first set of water meter results, and one of 60 with large leaks of more than 72 litres a day. So we're talking about unreported leaks. So that was private unreported leaks, but we have public unreported leaks too. I have personal experience of an unreported leak of 20 litres a second, which ran for about 2 weeks before we located and fixed it. That would supply about 4,000 homes in Auckland. That is like a decent hydrant running full bore. And the reason we had SCADA monitoring the zone just up the road here, Tumbuck Road, and the flow went up 20 litres a second. Minimum night flow jumped up 20 litres a second. I thought, there's a problem with the system. It can't be right. So I waited a few days and it stayed up there. The whole graph went up 20 litres a second, day and night. And after about 3 or 4 days, I thought, I better do something about this. So I thought, if you got a leak that big, that's coming out of a big main, because no one's complained of low pressure. So there's one big main goes up Dombuck Road. So I thought, I'll stop at the catch pits. And by the third one, I got out of the car and I could hear shh. Yeah, and man, it was a huge leak, which we found. So it can happen. We can have very large leaks in the system. Because water networks are designed to supply fire flows of 25 litres a second to fight fires in residential areas. So they're designed to supply a lot of water. And so they can supply large leaks without anyone noticing. So water networks can actually leak like a sieve and still deliver water to customers okay. So you might not be getting any complaints, and you could be losing 50% of your water, no problems at all. They're actually designed to be reliable and robust water supply systems. So they are. But they deliver water even when they're leaking badly. So just for those that aren't familiar with this, what do we do about managing water losses in the public network? Well, this is what we call 4 complementary leakage management activities, 4 key activities you can do. We'll start here. Speed and quality of repairs. When there's a burst main, get out there quickly, fix it, and do the job. If there's a small leak, get out there in a timely manner, or within a day or so, fix it. Don't let it run for weeks and weeks. If you leave it running, small leaks running for long periods of time will result in a high volume of losses in here. This is about having a reasonably good water network. So this comes down to what have you been doing the last 20, 30, 40 years with your water main renewals program? Have you been replacing water mains, or hasn't it been happening? Have you just thought, oh, it's okay, we'll build a library or we'll do something else? So basically this is about a water main renewal program, and also about choosing good materials, etc., so that you're building a low leak system. Active leakage control is what you need to do to go and find the unreported leaks, the ones that are in the ground. The one that I found, you had to go out and find it, and if I couldn't have done it, I would have got some contractor to go out with listening equipment to find leaks. That's active leakage control. And pressure management, you can turn down the pressure and it will reduce your leakage overnight. But this one's got two arrows, because if the pressure goes up, the converse happens. You'll have more leakage. So this works for you and against you. But normally we look at reducing water pressures and stabilising water pressures and reducing water losses that way. So there's the first one, fixing leaks quickly and properly. And we've seen this graph this morning. You've got a leak, you've got a time you've got to become aware of the leak, then you've got to locate the leak. Sometimes they're not obvious. The public might report a leak, it might be there, but it might be down the road, and the water's coming out of the ground. You've got to locate it, and then you've got to repair it. And all this is the leak run time. And like we showed this morning, small leaks running for long periods of time can end up with huge volumes compared to just a burst main that looks spectacular, gets its picture on the TV, but basically is all done in a day or something, and so that volume is this. The ones that you don't see is where most of this volume is going. And then I talked about replacing old leaking water mains. We have quite good asset management in New Zealand already, don't we? We have to do activity plans. We basically have asset management plans where we've got the information. We know the water main materials by length, by type, etc. And so we've got the information, and there's a lot of good water main renewal programs. But there are some material types, see galvanised here, a little wee tiny bit of galvanised doesn't really feature, so that's a pretty good system. But if there's galvanised pipes, they'll be leaking badly. They should be replaced tomorrow, as soon as possible. Active leakage control. There's all sorts of tools and equipment they can use, and Steve told us about 50 of them before. So there's plenty of means of finding leaks and locating leaks and fixing leaks. So basically, active leakage control. And basically, that's how you find these unreported leaks. And basically, the best way to do it is to monitor zones and check that the water comes down low levels at night. This is each night. The water's coming down to this level, and if that goes up, you know you've got some high leaks. So here's some graphs that's in our water loss guidelines. Actually, this is in that document I showed you before. If you plot, this is how many days? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about a week. About a week's worth of data. So is this. You can see this is a low leak system. Here's your morning peak. There's at night. There's your morning peak. Then that night flow seems a bit high. Anyway, a low leak system will come down nice and low at night. And so your losses aren't even 100% of that. The real losses are a proportion of that flow in the middle of the night. Compare it to here. You can put a line across there, and all that water, you could draw a line across there on 5 if you like, and all that water you can be sure is losses. So simply by getting information on the flows going into a system, you can look at that and say, well, this is going to have an ILI of about 1.2, and that's going to have an ILI of about 6. So that's, it's not rocket science. You can see that. And the question is, you can do that for a whole town, or you can do that for smaller areas. And the smaller area you do it, the more successful you're going to be. In pressure management, this is a graph just showing the relationship between pressure and leakage. And basically, this will be for steel pipes, and one of these is for PVC pipes. And basically it's pretty much a 45-degree angle. So basically pressure and leakage is fairly much proportional. And here's a real life example. The pressure was turned down. This is hydraulic, what we call hydraulic grade line. It's not the pressure, but basically the pressure was turned down here, and you can see the minimum night flow. This is a graph of 48 hours. So there's the first day, there's the second day, and you'll see the minimum night flow went down from 10.9 to 7.3 by reducing the pressure, and the whole graph is lower from then on. And so you've basically saved about 2.5 litres a second permanently, or long term. And it's happened overnight just with reducing pressure. So pressure management will give you quick results and very effective. But it's got to be thought through. You can't just reduce pressures everywhere. So how long does it all take? Well, I've just said pressure management is quick, but generally managing water losses to target levels takes commitment, time and effort. And Rome wasn't built in a day. That's a common saying, isn't it? Rome wasn't built in a day, and you're not going to get your losses down to low levels in 6 months. It won't happen. I would allow 5 years, except for pressure management. So start planning now for the next long-term water shortage. So that's the message. So basically, it takes a long time and it takes commitment. And I was fortunate because I was here at Waitakere and my job was just the network. I wasn't distracted by treatment plants and this and that. So I could focus and we got some great results. But basically, it took us 3 to 4 years, but we had a lot of momentum. But I'll show you a couple of graphs now. This is from Yarra Valley Water, one of the big retailers in Melbourne. Similar thing. Melbourne Water does the wholesale. Yarra Valley Water was one of the retailers. Don't need to worry about the treatment so much. They're just doing the network like I was doing at Waitakere. And here we go. A long journey to 12% non-revenue water. March 2013. So these dates, these are years. So that's 95, 96, 96, 97, etc. through to 2010, 11. And you can see in the first 4 or 5 years they made, look, they pretty well halved non-revenue water, which it is a percentage, but demand probably didn't change that much during that time. So basically we can pretty much say they halved their water losses over the first 5 years. And what did they do? Improved bulk meters and customer meters, zone metering, pressure management, active leakage control. See, all those key things they did. That's how they've made all this progress to here. And then they've been getting into a bit more sophisticated means since then. This is Waitakere. That was my patch. So basically this is 92. It was actually higher before 92. But anyway, basically the first 5 years we got it down. And see that number there? 60 litres of property connection per day. We got down to an ILO of 1 for a while. Then it started creeping up. But you can do it, but you've got to have a bit of time and effort. So this is the traditional water cycle. I'm being a little bit sarcastic here, but you'll see why in a minute. Here's the traditional water cycle. Here's another water cycle. Water supply situation normal. Water shortage or water incident. Water restrictions to reduce demand. Augment supply with tankers. The supply situation improves. The restrictions are eased and we're back to normal. Water cycle, easy. What's the problem? I often see, I'm not sure, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think there are any long-term learnings from the experience. As soon as it rains and the dams fill up, everything's forgotten. That's my view. So basically, these are my comments. Water losses are rarely mentioned during a water shortage. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I look for it and I don't often see it. It appears there is little proactive work undertaken to manage future shortages incidents, even though they are costly. So it's like you just bear the cost of this and then we're back to normal, and it was just a cost. But these things are going to happen more regularly. So what I'm trying to say is that I think people should be planning for them. Water losses typically account for 20 to 25%. This has probably been kind, actually. This has been kind. There is a lot of room for improvement. So when you're paying $200 for the water tanker to take your water up to the reservoir because you're running out of water, a third of that water is probably going straight out in the losses. So that's not very smart, is it? So that's what I'm saying. I think that's why I think it's a key issue. I guess that's why I do it for a job. Now this information was in an international water loss presentation in 2014 by a guy called Henderson, nice guy, in Africa. And I liked this, even though it was really probably more for Africa, but I think it still applies a bit in New Zealand. Water scarcity. There's absolute scarcity, insufficient quantity at the source, exacerbated by climate change. So, okay, we're running out of water at the source. That's a water scarcity issue. But what about economic scarcity? Financial constraints to expand infrastructure to meet increasing demand, or poor planning and demand forecasting. Basically, financial constraints. You know, obviously it was a big issue in Africa. The country's got no money, but I think it happens in New Zealand. You know, no one wants to put the water price up. You know, it's $1 a cubic metre. We can't afford a increase. You know, but why isn't water $2 a cubic metre or $5 a cubic metre? It's a essential service, and really we need the money to do the job. And I know the resources are really stretched in councils around New Zealand, and it's probably because the screws are put on by elected members. We can't put the price up. No, we can't put the price up. It's a mentality. I was lucky that my boss at Waitakere, he didn't have that mentality. If a job needs doing, you do it, and you worry about the money later. And it works. Anyway, and here's scarcity from poor management. So you can have financial constraints, so you haven't built stuff that you need. And here's scarcity from poor management, high leakage and wastage, so you might have absolute scarcity, but you might have half your water running to waste. And that's not very smart either. And that's caused by poor management, high leakage. And obviously in Africa, it's a whole lot worse than New Zealand. But I like the slide. That's why I put it up. So I've got about 4 or 5. Actually, no, it might be more than that. Anyway, I've got some slides now on summary and suggestions from all 3 parts. So, in my view, water losses from water networks in New Zealand are generally not well understood. And the use of percentages confuses matters further. So, you know, a lot of councils are using percentages. They'll be going up and down. No one probably really understands why people are explaining it away, and they're comparing them with the town down the road or the city down there with a dairy factory, and it's not fair, and basically that's an issue. Water networks are designed to be reliable. They can leak like a sieve and deliver water. I've done water balances and the water losses are 50%. There's no problem, and there's no customer issues. There's plenty of, actually they've got a good source, but basically they're losing 50%. But if they have an incident, and the treatment plant will have a capacity, so it won't be about the big storage, it'll be about the capacity of the system to provide and what you're left with. For urban systems, real losses in 100 litres per connection per day is a low level of water loss. For rural systems, you use a different performance indicator. An infrastructure leakage index is good for comparing systems, and ILI of less than 2. And remember, we had this graph of the supplies in New Zealand. And there was quite a good number down here, around 2, so that was pretty good. Water leaks can be private or public. Private leaks are part of consumption, so don't be confused. Any leaks on private property are here. Whether the meter records them or not, or whatever, the water is going there, and it's not down here. So it's on private property, so private leaks are up here. And unreported leaks are the ones that cause high leakage because they run for long periods of time. And you've got to go out and find them. Because if the public doesn't see them and report them, they're probably escaping down, they might have a nuisance value, but basically if they don't get reported, you've got to go out and find them. And some of these can be big, and they can run for long periods of time. Basically we have a production line and supplying water. And any break or capacity issue will cause supply issues. So you break the chain, you're going to have a problem. And there are numerous supply risks associated with climate change, earthquakes and asset failure. And I've probably missed some. I didn't do an exhaustive study or anything, I just put down the things I could think of. But you know, there's algae, there's low rainfall, there's slips, there's storms, there's cyclones, there's storm damage, there's all sorts of things. Having low water losses will help mitigate supply risk. So any reduction, having low losses, when these things happen, this becomes important. So reducing water losses has a range of short, medium and long-term benefits, which I've talked about. So in an incident, having low water losses will allow more time to respond. And like I say, it might only be 1 more hour. But if it's a 6-hour job, 1 hour is a lot of time when the clock's ticking and the guys are tightening up the last few bolts and you've got to go and turn the water on, you've got to flush and then you want the water on before before 6 p.m. when everyone's cooking their meals. So that can be important. In the medium term, water losses can help avoid supply shortages, so you saw the cumulative effect. In the longer term, reducing water losses creates spare capacity, which can then be used for growth, and significant items of capital expenditure can be deferred, or may be able to be deferred. There are environmental benefits associated with low water losses, reduced water take, meaning increased residual stream flows, less impact on aquifers, and reduced carbon footprint. So the variable cost, remember, is quite low, 5 to 10 cents, peanuts, very cheap. You can multiply it by 2,000 for tankering water and 10,000 times if you get into bottled water. So if you run short of water, it's not going to be cheap. And so where there's growth in supply and capacity is being reached in a network, reducing water losses will generally be far more economic than increasing supply capacity. If it's significant, obviously, if you're just reducing your losses, if they're pretty good and you just reduce it by a little bit, it's not going to be that significant. But in some places, it will make a difference. If there's little or no growth, so this could be rural New Zealand where things are pretty stationary, the economic benefit of having low losses, it appears low. You think, well, there's no point. There's no growth, and we've got whatever. So let's not really bother. But it can be considered like insurance. With insurance, you pay your insurance. Not many people need it, but when it happens, and if it happens to you, it's really important. So basically, in a supply shortage or incident, it will be significant benefit. It will be of significant benefit. But in normal years, not so much. But you never know what's going to happen to you. You can be a little town down the middle of the North Island, but you don't know. There could be an earthquake tomorrow that knocks half your system out. And if your system's leaking 50%, you're going to have some explaining to do, eh? So that's what it's about. So what's what I'm saying? I think even with no growth, and you might think you have heaps of capacity, to me, it's just good management. And this is what I had in the advert. If you manage water losses well, the network will be managed well. So basically, when you look at this is maintenance, this is asset management, this is doing leak stuff, this is managing pressure. If you do all this, you're probably 80% towards managing a system well. And Tim Waldron, the guy that was here 2 years ago and helped me present, he was the CEO of Wide Bay Water for a while, which is in North Queensland. He was the CEO of the company, and every Monday, or so every week, he wanted to see a booklet saying the minimum night flows in his system. And he was a smart CEO, so he knew what to look for. That's what he did. As an observation, because water networks are so reliable, staff often deal with other pressing matters, and water loss management is overlooked and considered a low priority. This is an observation, but I go to a lot of councils, quite a lot of councils, and people are busy and they're rushing around. They're good people, they're doing their jobs, and it's firefighting. And in my view, it needs a bit of a shake-up, and I guess it is coming. But basically, like I say, if the water supply, if we haven't got customer complaints, then that can wait till tomorrow, and I've got to do this over here. And water quality has had a huge, it's a big issue. You've got to have safe water to drink, right? We've got the regulator, and you've got a lot of stuff happening. So water quality is important. But the trouble is, the water network you can leave and it'll probably be okay. So that's the problem. That's the problem. It's a good thing and a bad thing. This is just a recommendation that all non-residential properties are metered to assist in calculating the water balance. I do a lot of water balances. And basically, if you can at least meter all non-residential customers, then we're just looking at residential. And it's a lot easier just to assess residential consumption like in winter and do a part water balance. And all I'm saying is that if you can meter all non-residential properties and read the meters every 4 months, 3 or 4 months, then that graph I showed you, you can see what the trend, what's happening with build consumption through the year, and then what's happening with residential consumption, and then it makes the water balance a lot easier. Obviously it's better if they meter all properties, Central government could come out and say, right, we want all properties metered. Let's do it in the next 3 years. They could, but I don't think there's any appetite really, but it'd be a good idea. And it's likely to take probably 5 years to reduce real losses to target levels or to a reasonable level. It takes time, effort and commitment. And you need someone at the top of the organisation, and that's why The guy that spoke here from Whakatane, he was a manager, came here 2 years ago with his right-hand man, and they went back and they've done stuff and they've made, they're making good progress. If people see, and there's other councils I could quote too, but it takes time and effort. And when I joined Waitakere in 1989, you wouldn't believe it. They were spending $200,000 plus a year looking for leaks, citywide acoustic ground survey. That is a huge amount of money. And so by the time I did the zoning and all that, by the late 90s, we were spending $60,000 a year, and we had a lot less losses. But the point of what I'm saying is that my boss knew back then that water losses were important, and he put his money where his mouth was. So good for him. He was a good guy. And so anyway, it takes 5 years, so it's not going to happen overnight. Thank you for listening. So I can take a few questions if you like, if you've got questions. But anyway, you can see I've sort of summarised what I've been thinking about the last few years, and things come to light. So happy to be challenged on what I've said. But anyway, that's why I think water losses are important. Thanks.
Add to what you've been saying, Richard, when we have water losses, we get into restrictions. It's too late. That's not the time to save water. The time to save water is when you have plenty. Keep that in mind. You save water when you've got water. Be smart about it. Once you've got restrictions,
yeah, that's right. Often when the water shortages hit, it's too late. You're too late with the losses. You might be able to do pressure management and as an emergency type thing, you might be able to crank the pressures down. But basically, it's too late. You've got to start planning now for the next one. That's right. And reducing demand. And the other thing, when you looked at that residential water use, you got Auckland, and I know there's other councils in the north of the North Island, down at around 160 litres a person per day water use. Now, you can't expect them to save much water. You get into a crisis, you're lucky. Watercare's done well getting 10%, but basically you're down to non-discretionary water use, really. We get up in the morning, we have a shower, we have a shave or whatever, we cook, we go, we do the washing, and we're using 150 probably litres. There's no, you can't expect people to not do public health things, to live. So the more, at low levels of water use, you've also lost all the capacity to cut 25% of your demand in a crisis. You just can't get this to come down by 25%. When we had the 1992-93 shortage, we reduced demand by 33%. And that was a combination of reducing pressures and basically big calls for reducing water use. But you wouldn't do that, you couldn't do that now because people are only using 160, so you might get them down to 130. I monitored an apartment block once and they were using 130 litres per person per day. So that's no outdoor use, that's just living, So you're getting down to pretty basic water use. So you can't expect customers to reduce the demand by that much. Other parts of New Zealand you can, they can turn things off and you'd probably just about halve it. Yeah, because what I didn't mention, I'm doing it on a presentation tomorrow, but basically if you put in water meters, if you meter unmetered consumption, you see at Tauranga, about peak day demand was reduced by about 25%. Might have been more, between 25 and 30%. You can reduce peak day demand by metering these properties, and you'll probably reduce annual overall total volume by about 10%. So, it's significant. So water metering is a great way to reduce consumption. But I'm obviously talking about this, but and there's councils around New Zealand doing it. I've got graphs. I did a graph. I've been doing water balance for about the last 6 years for a place down south. They're putting water meters, and you can see in some places the impact is unbelievable.
There's a double-edged sword, unfortunately, with getting your customers to reduce their demand, and it's an issue they picked up in Australia. Didn't think about it at the time. We have water shortages, reduce your consumption. What happens when you reduce consumption? Your income drops. So their revenue, they didn't have the money coming in to pay for the running of the operations. So you've got to keep that in mind as well, and you've got to start thinking about exactly what Richard said. We don't charge enough for water. We don't. We're all quite happy to go to a gas station and pay $3 for a litre of bottled water, but we can claim paying $2 to get 1,000 litres to deliver to our house. It doesn't make sense.
I agree. I think water's way too cheap. And it's only a historic thing. It's because I guess we look back on historical trend, you know, but basically I think Wellington's finding out, aren't they? What's the rate increase? 15%, something? Yeah, it's a pretty big rate increase there for sorting out their infrastructure issues. Anyway, thank you for listening. I think we can... Oh, yeah?
Richard, any comment on reducing water pressures and meeting fire flow requirements? Have you seen any problem in that regard? And also apartment buildings, there are a lot of apartment buildings going in. Any trouble with that in terms of pressure management?
Oh, right. Yeah, well, that's true. Well, firstly, the fire flows. Well, we've talked about a bit this today during the session. So generally flows from fire hydrants in the street, not so much a problem, but the fire sprinkler systems, you can get the information and you can have a look to see which ones are going to be impacted. Some will be fine, some might be marginal, some might be a problem, but there are ways to solve the problem. And so you wouldn't want one building holding up the pressure in this whole area. So basically you say, we put the hard word on, well, you're going to have to build a diesel pump set. They can always pump and pressurise their water. So there are solutions. I guess it's who pays, but like legally, I think councils are in a strong footing to get the customer to sort that out. But you want to give them time. You don't want to say do it tomorrow. You just want to say, I'm going to reduce the pressure in 2 years' time. You know, give people a bit of time. Apartment buildings, well, that's true. But it's good to have a plan for pressures in a region so that you know if a high-rise is going up. Well, generally once you get to 3 or 4 stories, they should be looking at a pump internally. Yeah.